It's over 9,000!
Welcome, Super Elite Warriors, to Final Forum, a podcast for the discussion of all things Dragon Ball. I am your host, Jelly, an elite recruiting member of the Frieza Force, on a mission to find the best warriors from across the galaxy to join the greatest army of all time. And I am joined, as always, by my new recruit co-host.
This is the Bekinney.
And we're still just floating around in space. And as we like to do, at least I've decided, whenever we're having some downtime, let's do something a little different from the usual and reach out to a friend to join us. And we're going to call out on our scouter now. Derek, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. Joining us today on Final Forum, we have Derek Padula, the world's first and foremost professional Dragon Ball scholar. Derek is the author of several nonfiction books on the Dragon Ball franchise, including the Dragon Ball Culture series, which we've mentioned a few times before on this podcast, and the books Dragon Soul, 30 Years of Dragon Ball Fandom, and It's Over 9,000 When Worldviews Collide. He's the creator of the blog The Tao of Dragon Ball, which features a lot of knowledge about the Dragon Ball universe, as well as hosting some fan-created manga. And Derek is one of the co-creators of Dragon Ball Z, Life of Hope, a live-action DBZ web series that went viral in 2015 and has amassed over 35 million views to date. He's been writing about Dragon Ball since 2003, has sold thousands of books, and has had millions of visitors to his site, and we're super excited to have him join us. Derek, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's quite the impressive resume.
Well, thanks.
So, Derek, one thing we talked about when we first started the show is that we shared our stories of how we came to Dragon Ball to kind of, contextualize it for people. And then we found out, most people probably have a similar story. But, for my part, I was actually at a sleepover at a friend's house, and this show came on, like a late night, probably Toonami type of airing, but it was the episode where Goku went Super Saiyan for the first time, except I walked out of the room like right before that happened, and when I came back in, he had gold hair, and I was like, what is this? The main character's hair changes color from scene to scene, but I'd like to hear your story and how you first came to become a Dragon Ball fan.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Everybody has a Dragon Ball origin story. For me, it was on Toonami, but it was in the afternoon block. And I had come home from school, and I'd seen the commercials beforehand, but I watched it right from the get-go with Raditz showing up and the big fight between him and Goku and Piccolo, and I was just blown away by all the action. And this was with the Pioneer dub, with the Ocean dub and the original cast in America. That it just, everything about it spoke to me. I loved the martial arts because I grew up watching Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee, and I loved the Eastern use of like this energy that was coming out of their bodies. I liked the humor. I liked the colors, just how bright it was, and the full saturation of colors, and the sensibility of like this combination of different elements. I didn't really understand it the way that I do now, where I can see it as different cultures fusing together. but it was like this Eastern and Western, just, I don't know if melange is the right word, but it had all these different elements that came together. And it really appealed to me for some reason. So I started watching it every day. Then it sort of became an obsession where my friends and I would watch it. And one of them said, "Hey man, why don't we live this?" And I was like, "What do you mean live it?" And he said, "Well, let's go take a martial arts class." And it had never occurred to me before to do that, even though I loved martial arts films. So I didn't really know what that would entail. I'd grown up playing team sports like soccer and baseball and football, and then I got into lacrosse. But this was like an individual thing, and I was kind of a little nervous about it. But he said, "Hey, my mom will drive us. You don't have to do anything. They have a free class. Let's just go. I need somebody to go with. Come on." So I'm like, "All right, fine." So we went to this place called Chan's Kung Fu, and it was amazing. It absolutely blew me away. I felt like I was Krillin. I was doing all the deep stances, the horse stance and the cross stance, the hanging crane stance, all these things, jumping around and throwing punches and kicks. And I loved it. And I came home, I told my parents, I said, I want to do this. And so I signed up for 3 months and they were on board. And then it just became my life. And I was watching DBZ every day, going and training in Kung Fu for like 3 hours a day, then coming home and training some more. And I was like Goku, just like workaholic when it came to training. And it started to affect my personality and improve my outlook on life. And it just completely transformed my life. And I can go into more details about it, but that's really my origin story. As I found Dragon Ball when I was a young man. I was early high school, and it just changed everything.
I'm going to make my kids listen to that story because
that's inspirational.
I tried to take them to like a karate class one time, and I had like a free week of it or something. And like every day when they were there, they liked it. But every time getting there, they cried like the whole way there.
Oh,
no. But no, that's really cool. I would like to hear a little bit, you talk about it changed kind of your life or your perceptions. I mean, I've listened to one of your other interviews, so I kind of have an idea of what you're alluding to, but I would like you to share it with our listeners actually, because I think it's a really good mentality actually.
Okay, sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, but before I became the Dragon Ball scholar, I was just a regular Dragon Ball fan. I was depressed. I was nerdy. I got picked on and bullied at school, and I was into things that other kids didn't think was cool back then. Anime is acceptable now. It's mainstream. Kids grow up with it. It's there right when they start watching TV, and they can stream it whenever they want. But when I was a kid, you had to go to these weird, like, boutique stores that were like kind of far off the beaten path, and it was expensive. Or you had to go to Chinatown and get bootleg dubs with like Cantonese, dubs and like really bad subtitles and things. It was a different time, and to like that stuff back then wasn't as acceptable. And I got bullied, and I became depressed, and I reached the point where I didn't want to live anymore because I was having trouble at home. So I was having trouble at school all day long, and I felt like a prison. And then I came home, and my parents were fighting, and my brothers were having a hard time too. And I just felt like I had no place in this world, and I always wanted to escape. So Dragon Ball sort of became my escape. It was a place where I could go to see bright colors and positivity and endurance and perseverance through hardships. I became enamored with the philosophy of Goku and this idea of never giving up. Even when you're getting beaten up, you still keep fighting, and eventually you get through it. And that was instrumental because I reached a point where I wanted to kill myself, and I didn't have anybody to turn to. So I was going to go through with it. And I took a knife from the kitchen, steak knife block, and went into the bathroom, closed the door, and looked into the mirror, into my eyes for what I thought was going to be the last time, as I held this knife to my wrist. And I thought, this is it. Like, nobody wants me. I'm not accepted. I don't want to go through this pain anymore. So let's just end it. And as I was about to slice my wrist, a thought flashed through my mind that Goku wouldn't do this. Goku would survive for one more minute, one more hour, one more day. He would do whatever it took to continue fighting and persevere. And it was all I needed to put the knife down and then drop to my knees in tears. And I was like, yes, I can make it for another day. That one day is all I have to do to be more like Goku. So I did. I put the knife back. I never told anybody what happened. And then that day became a week and a month and year and 10 years and now decades. And Goku, his philosophy of endurance saved my life, and Dragon Ball saved my life. Without Dragon Ball, I'd be dead. And that's part of why I decided to write my books and to give back to the community, is because Dragon Ball really saved me. And I know it's saved so many other people as well. It's a transformative, life-saving series, while at the same time being a series about big muscled guys screaming and punching each other. It's both of those things, and it's the best at both of them. And it's really a series that means a lot to me, and it has a lot of heart in it. And I feel like at the time, there was nobody talking about this type of content in the series. It was all about who can beat who in a fight, who has the biggest power level, can Goku beat Superman, and all that stuff.
Things have really changed.
Yeah. It's still the same in that regard, but I wanted to bring something more to it and my perspective on it. And so at the time, I looked online and there was nobody talking about this type of stuff. So I decided to write about it. And I created my website, The Tao of Dragon Ball. And that's where I talk about the Taoists and Buddhists and other cultural aspects of the series. But that was because I missed a section here of this story, which is, so I survived all of that, made it through high school, finally got onto a proper path of like Kung Fu and martial arts and discipline. And it just really changed my life. I got into Eastern philosophy and culture, and I made that my major at Western Michigan University, studied abroad in Beijing, China, trained with the Shaolin monks. So I really became Krillin. I got the orange robes, did all that stuff. And it just it was an amazing experience. And then when I came back, I was seeing all of these parallels between what I was studying in class and what I was seeing in Dragon Ball and had grown up watching. And I decided to start writing about it. And then that became some articles, which then became some books. And now here I am. I have 8 books with some more coming in, and also available in Spanish and Italian, and a French one about to come out, and another one in Portuguese. This Japanese cartoon made by a guy, who just wanted to make some silly Journey to the West adventure, has completely changed my life and the lives of so many others.
Yeah, that's really powerful stuff, and I'm really glad you're able to share that with us, because I think that hopefully if anyone out there is listening and is feeling any of those same kind of things, I mean, hopefully being comfortable and feeling like you can share that gives someone else inspiration to one more day, because it's a shame when anyone takes their own life and does that, because there's people who care about everyone, and you never know, you could end up bringing something into the world that people really enjoy, like the way I have enjoyed the 3 of your books that I've read so far. So,
well, thank you very much.
So you're young guy, you get into it, you take the karate, you go to China, and you've you've kind of alluded to this a little bit, but what makes you take the leap from being this fan and seeing all these parallels and things to an author? I mean, what made you start writing about it rather than just I don't know, maybe videos or trying to share your information with other people who are writers? And I know you have at least a little bit of a relationship with the guys at, I think, Kanzen Shu. Like, Was it like maybe a class you took in school at some point that made you realize you had kind of a knack for writing? Or is it just all these hours of independent research you stored up that just, via being this big of a fan really made you want to share that knowledge with the world? Or was it the fame and the glory and the money and the women, like we all have?
It was that, all of that stuff you mentioned. Yeah. No, I got into this before YouTube was a thing. There was no platform to be sitting in front of a camera and talking. So in 2003, it was like, how am I going to do this? Well, there were websites you could go to, like Kanzenshu that you mentioned. It was the biggest Dragon Ball, platform, the forum for Western fans, and it still is. And other than Reddit, perhaps. But if you want like actual discussion of the series, go to Kanzenshu, because you get some real in-depth conversations, and it's great. And those guys have been working on that for decades, and they do it as volunteers. I mean, it's just their group. They're really, really passionate fans. For me, I have an analytical mind, and I grew up with two parents who were analysts and consultants, and my brothers are the same way. And I just look at a piece of content, and I can break it down, see the patterns, and I enjoy it. So I started to write these things down that I was seeing, and I amassed so much. I don't want to call them insights at the time. It was just like, hey, did you ever notice, kind of a thing, like, oh, those symbols on their dogis, and then what is a dogi? Where's that term come from? Oh, it's Japanese. Then you look at the kanji and you break the kanji down into patterns, and you start to see all of these symbols and these shapes. And I wanted to understand it. So I wrote those things down so that I could better understand them. And then I eventually had so much of it that I felt like I should share this with other people, because maybe this has value outside of my own pursuit of knowledge. Maybe there are other people like me who are looking for this type of knowledge. And I never really thought of it as a job until my ex-fiance, Deborah, said, you should do this professionally. Because I had been a video game designer in Los Angeles for a few years. That was my dream growing up. I always wanted to make video games. So I worked for Activision and Electronic Arts and 7 Studios, and I made some pretty cool games. It didn't really become a full... it was a career, but it wasn't a super successful path that I was following. And it took me a long time to transition into being a full-time author. But writing my first book about Goku and Vegeta's psychology, the Dragon Ball Z It's Over 9,000 book, that one, once I started selling hundreds of copies, I realized, like, oh, there's an opportunity here. There are people out there who want to learn more about this. And like what was going to be one book, The Tao of Dragon Ball, into a 7-book series, became Dragon Ball Culture, which is really like a master's degree in Dragon Ball, starting with Akira Toriyama's life story and the origin of the series and Journey to the West and all of these things that I've spent a lifetime studying. It sort of became my profession because I was so enamored with it. Nowadays, I guess people can say, you know what, I'm going to be this type of YouTuber, or I'm going to be like a professional who focuses on Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh or something. but back then there was no such thing. And I was just sort of making it up as I went along.
Awesome. So we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit here and kind of start to focus more on the writing process itself. So essentially you become a fan, you decide you want to write a book on Dragon Ball. Did you need to do further research, or were you kind of ready to go based on all the other research that you'd done over the years up to that point?
No, it all requires a massive amount of research. Even if you think you know everything about Dragon Ball, like let's say you've watched every episode of the series. Okay, that's a really good start. How many times have you watched it? Have you memorized it? Have you read all of the manga chapters? Have you played all of the video games? Have you watched all of the movies? Okay, that's all good stuff. That's all consumption of official Dragon Ball content. Now, what about Akira Toriyama? Do you know what he's interested in? Have you watched the movies that he's watched that influenced Dragon Ball? Have you studied Japanese or Chinese? Or do you have a proficiency in English where you can understand the linguistic turns of phrases that Toriyama is using, or the portmanteaus that he creates with the names, all of the food-based naming conventions, all of the attack names, all of the location names, all the symbols, the kanji, and the other uniforms that the characters wear, like the gods and things like that. It just keeps going and going. And then there's also the voice acting world and the production of the series itself. From the manga with Akira Toriyama's editor, Kazuhiko Torishima at Shueisha, to the Toei animation crew with all of the producers and animators and composers and lyricists. And you have to absorb all of this information, and then you have to process it and then come up with some type of original insight that readers are going to want to pay for. And then you have to form it into a cohesive narrative in a chronological format. So you start at the beginning and you work your way towards some end point in an entertaining manner. So it doesn't read like a Wikipedia article, because nobody wants to read that for 300 pages.
Nobody wants to sit and read Wikipedia.
No, not for 300 pages, And that's what separates my work from others, because now we live in the information age where you can just type in how many episodes of Dragon Ball are there, and you can see the number, and you can go to the different fan-based wikis, and you can see content that is pretty basic trivia, right? But to take that trivia and turn it into a narrative that is insightful and entertaining is difficult, and it's a skill that has to be honed. You don't just start out being able to do that. You have to really work at it, and it takes a lot of practice and a lot of mistakes and a lot of help from people who care about you and want your work to be improved. I do the work myself, but I get feedback from people who care about me, and it makes it a better product. And of course, the fans are amazing. Dragon Ball fans, I think, are the best community out there, because I only interact with the nice ones. Like the smart ones who are interested in learning and improving themselves. That's a really nice little slice of the community that I get to engage with.
And by the way, listeners, if you want to know what we're going to be covering over the next, decade of having a podcast, just listen to that long list of things Derek rattled off. But you mentioned, have you looked into Toriyama and the things he likes? And so that was kind of a question I had, while reading some of your books. It's pretty obvious that you are a fan, or were a fan, of at least some of this stuff, Drunken Master or Bruce Lee movies, like before you kind of came to Dragon Ball and came to researching Toriyama. But I mean, what percentage, maybe if you can throw a percentage on it, of stuff were you a fan of and were you already aware of, and what stuff did you have to kind of approach after the fact, after learning that he was a fan of it and you wanted to use it to inform your opinion on Dragon Ball?
There was a good portion of it that I'd already seen, and so that's why I was able to recognize that content in my initial watch of the series and in reading the manga. Like when you see Sergeant Metallic, you can see the Terminator if you've watched the Terminator before, right? You have to have had prior experience with these movies and the characters and like the stereotypes or archetypes that are in these films prior to watching Dragon Ball in order to get the joke or get the reference that he's making. But there are some things that will fly over most people's heads because they're so obscure. And in those cases, I had to go back and watch the movies that I think Toriyama might have watched. And it was always a guessing game. So I had to do a lot of research into like the best kung fu films of all time, but also I had to watch hundreds of terrible kung fu movies that were so bad and generic, and just I didn't want to watch them, but I had to in case Toriyama referenced them at some point. And it was a lot of hard work to just sit there and watch terrible movies. But I also watched the American American Film Institute's top 100 films of all time. A bunch of sci-fi films, like a lot of weird Japanese movies and things that like the anime staff referenced that Toriyama wasn't even involved with. But like there's one I watched. Do you remember that episode of Dragon Ball where Goku is in a filler arc and he meets this like fox who steals a car and like they're driving around and like trying to get to this airport?
I don't remember that actually.
Okay, yeah, it's a really obscure character that nobody ever references.
On that one too.
Yeah, it's like Dombe the fox, I think. But there's like this green fox character. Well, anyways, he has this really strange manner of speaking in Japanese where he calls everybody Aniki, which means bro. He's like, hey bro, hey Aniki. And what I found was that this character was referenced, was an homage to a character in a classic Japanese like spy assassin movie, and from like the 60s in black and white. And it's just those little references that you would never have guessed were in there unless you had seen the movie prior to watching that episode or reading that chapter. And Toriyama does that a lot in the manga, and like he'll just do it without telling anybody. He'll just take these characters' likenesses and put them in there, and he never, explains that that's what he's done. Like a good example is with Tao Pai Pai's character being based off the villain from Snake and Eagle's Shadow. He just uses his complete likeness and puts him in there, and he's based off a real person from these movies, from these Jackie Chan films. So you kind of have to have watched all of these things, and then you burn their images into your brain, and then you go and watch Dragon Ball again, or you read the manga again, and then you see if there's a match. And you have to do that with every single panel of every page, and it's a lot of work. And then you have to be able to explain it to people in a succinct manner.
Right, especially because Toriyama will use it as a throwaway joke or a single moment, or I mean, I don't even remember this Fox character, but even thinking of characters that maybe some people might remember, like the two monks who give Krillin a hard time, and recognizing that they are possibly stand-ins for like Frankie Sakai, and it's the amount of work to go into just find a single reference is
yeah, or even simple references like Dracula. Like there's a Dracula character standing in the crowd in one of Goku's fights. It's like, well, okay, if you know who Dracula is, then you'll get the joke. But if you don't, then it's going to go over your head, and you're going to wonder who this weird looking character is. And so I've had people like read my book and they didn't know who Dracula was. I'm like, how do you not know who Dracula is? But that's because we grew up hearing about Dracula and watching Dracula movies and things, and sort of Toriyama. But I'm like, oh, you're right. I have to explain who Dracula is, don't I? Because there might be some readers who didn't grow up with that.
Yeah, so knowing you basically have to just include everything, because you can't editorialize really of what's important or not important to point out.
That's exactly right. I make the presumption that the reader knows nothing when they start reading my book. So I will not assume that you know something and then I skip over it, because then you'll be lost. And I like to educate readers and bring them up from nothing all the way to having a really thorough understanding of Akira Toriyama and Dragon Ball and the world that he created.
I appreciate that, honestly, because I'm one of the fans that, even though I love the show, I didn't really initially look at it with a very critical eye, and so to see all of these different layers of references that go into this and how much work he put into it really opened my eyes to just how wonderful a work this really is, honestly.
Well, that's great to hear. Thank you very much.
So you go down this deep rabbit hole of films and all this different philosophy and what have you. You collect all this information. You want to put it, like you said, into a coherent narrative. But what's the actual physical act of writing like for you? Like, do you have a set number of hours per day? Do you go through formal layouts and outlines for this stuff? How do you get from, okay, I have this idea, to I have a book that's now ready to be published?
Yeah, it usually starts with an idea, just a little seed of an idea. Like I have a folder filled with Dragon Ball book ideas, and I pick one that I think sounds promising, and then I'll start working on it. The issue with me though is my books are so thorough that they can take several years to write. So, and I'm at the point now where I realize, like, okay, actually, I have to start getting books out quicker, because the more books you have out as an author, the more you can earn. Because even if you have a super fan, if you only have 3 books out, and then once they buy all 3, there's nothing more for them to buy. So you have to get more out, you know? And so it's like this ever constant process of trying to get out more content while researching more content, while also managing your business, and trying to sign and ship books and manage your social media. And if you have translations going like I do, you have to do that, and you have to format them, and you have to launch those books. And so it really became this huge, like, multi-tentacled octopus thing, or like spinning all these plates simultaneously. And I realized I need help. So now I'm finally hiring some employees, so I can be more productive. But it really all just starts with an idea, like I open up a little text pad, notepad document, and I start writing about something that would be cool. Like I'm looking through my folder and I see a Dragon Ball food book, which is a cookbook that has all of the Dragon Ball characters and the ones that are named after food. And then it gives recipes for those characters' food-based names. And it has like their pictures next to it,
I'll just say this real quick. I would absolutely buy that book.
Well, me too.
Oh, great. All right. Maybe I'll start on that one next. And another one is like Dragon Ball math. And so it's math problems within the Dragon Ball world. Like how far can Goku kick football? Or how far can Vegeta or Yamcha hit a baseball or something like that, And you do physics-based problems or math-based equations for punching things and kicking things. And it helps people learn math, but through a Dragon Ball perspective. And I think that would be a lot of fun.
Could Yamcha hit a baseball hard enough to crater himself?
I think if Vegeta threw the baseball, it would crater him as soon as he hit it. Yeah.
That's probably true.
Yeah. So in the case of like my first book, it's over 9,000. It went through several iterations. One of them was it was just called Why Vegeta Hates Goku. And it was all about the differences in their perspectives and like philosophies, and like Vegeta's pride versus Goku's nonchalant attitude, doesn't really care about anything. And that sort of got into more detail when I started to look at it from the fans' perspective of like, why do some fans gravitate toward Goku while others gravitate toward Vegeta? And then I got into the psychology of it, and it evolved into becoming a book about introspective analysis and culture and the environments that we grow up in, and how they grew up in different environments. Even though they're genetically similar, they're both 100% full-blooded Saiyans who love to fight and eat and grow stronger. What separates them is the environment that they grew up in. And if Goku hadn't bumped his head, he might have ended up, and then being raised by Son Gohan, he would have been a completely different person. While Vegeta grew up under, a tyrant father, and then Frieza killed his tyrant father and became his tyrant adoptive father, and really just brutal, like you kill or be killed kind of world. And that's why when they clash, it becomes such an amazing fight, and then they end up becoming such great rivals and growing with one another. And so it didn't start out that way. It started out as just an idea of like, how can I explain why Vegeta hates Goku so much? And then it grew into something really grand, and I think transformative. But it's only that way because of what Akira Toriyama put into the series to begin with. And I'm referencing what's already in there. And I think that just goes to show how talented he truly is.
I'd have to agree with that one. So we have a lot of self-published authors as friends and listeners of the podcast. What do you see as an author as some of the biggest potential pitfalls of writing, and how have you overcome them in the past?
The biggest pitfall is that anybody can do it, and they are doing it, and they're putting out books into this sea of, paper or digital paper that it just gets lost. And if you publish a book, it has a high chance of never being bought. It's really sad. So the way I overcame that was by already having my own website, the DaoofDragonBall.com. I had a platform, and now they're called authors platforms. And so that allowed me to market it through that platform and speak 100% dedicated Dragon Ball fans. So I wrote a book about something that already exists as a phenomenon, and it's the world's most recognized anime and manga. So that really helps. If I had chosen some other topic that was less popular, I might have struggled a lot more. But it's still very difficult, especially to do it all by yourself. It requires a tremendous amount of effort to build up a social media following on your own, and to write articles on your own, and edit them and publish them on your own, and do the multimedia and everything else. So it's a lot of work to be an author and to have an author's platform. But if you're passionate about it, then you can get an audience and people who will support you. Like, I just had a guy buy the full box set of Dragon Ball Culture today, and the same thing happened 2 days ago. And I posted about it on social media 2 days ago, and then the guy on Twitter saw that and said, "Hey, I'd like to order one too." So it's really cool how that works now that I have this following. But it wasn't like that way at the beginning. And it's still pretty rare now. Most people buy books through Amazon.
Guilty.
Yeah. Right. Which I'm grateful for, of course. Because it's always fun to log into Amazon and see another number tick up in the sales. But I like seeing the reviews. Most people are really positive with reviews. As a self-published author, you kind of, when you start out, you don't have a reputation. So getting those reviews is extremely important. So if there's anybody out there who's listening to this and has read my books but has not reviewed them, please take a minute to review them, or do the same thing for other authors that you enjoy reading, because it really makes a big difference.
Podcasts that you enjoy listening to.
Yes, exactly.
Shameless self-promotion.
Yeah.
Count one.
Yeah, it's the same idea. It really helps. It's the fans who make it possible.
Agree with that.
Right.
Were there any assumptions you had going into becoming a writer, and then once you actually were published, that changed those assumptions?
No, not really. I don't tend to make assumptions in general. So I don't really have any assumptions that I can think of, except for maybe one. Sometimes people, when you're reading online about being an author, they say, all you have to do is sell a few hundred copies or a few thousand or whatever, and you can make a good living. It's really not true. Yeah. It will require a lot of sacrifice, and you're going to have to lose in other areas of your life in order to become an author. Unless you just somehow hit the gold mine right at the start with some kind of huge success, it's going to be tough. It's been a real labor of love, but emphasis on the labor part, that has taken decades of work and counting to produce these books, because I don't want to put out poor quality content. I really try to emphasize the quality of my work, and I am self-critical, and I self-edit. So there's a constant struggle of thinking, this is good, but it's not good enough, and a little bit of perfectionism in there. And so I'm working on that. I'm trying to let that go, because I want to put out more content that people are excited about. Because there are a lot of Dragon Ball fans out there, and they want to read this.
Okay. Yeah, so you mentioned editing a little bit, and then along those lines, and, talked about maybe some kind of changes you might have made to kind of how you approach things. When you come across a piece of information, if this ever happens, that maybe contradicts something you wrote about before, or if not as dramatic as a contradiction, but maybe sheds new light on it, or if there's a minor correction to make that gets pointed out, maybe something as simple as like a misspelling slipping through the editing process. How do you approach that? Do you ever do revisions to your books? Do you address it on your site? Do you append things? I'm curious how you kind of approach that situation.
Yeah, it depends on how big of the edit it is. If it's really small, like a typo, I'll try to fix that as soon as possible in the ebooks, because it's free for me to update the ebooks. When it comes to the print books, I usually get charged to update those, and so I'll try to do them in like a batch, like a bunch of them at once. When it comes to a contradiction or some type of new information that comes to light, I believe at the time of publication that everything I say is 100% accurate and factual and based off of all of the sources that I have available at the time. If something changes later on, then I will try to make an amendment or like put it in a footnote or something. But in most cases, at this point, the book has been published and that's it. Like I have to move on to something else. But I make a note so that if I do a second edition, I can update it. For example, there was in my first book, came out in 2012, the term Frieza Force had not been used yet in an official Toriyama, script, because it was marketed during the resurrection of F, right? But like it had become like, so then I had to go back in my sort of like update the footnote, and I sort of did that for the Italian edition that just came out because fans now are familiar with that term, but it wasn't a thing back in the day.
Okay. So this question, I feel like we've talked about it a little bit, but I am curious, and this might be a little bit more for fiction authors, but I am curious. Have you ever had anything that you wanted to put into a book and had to edit out for any reason, right? I mean, I know you said you always want to be thorough and not really omit any facts or information, but are there anecdotes you've had to cut out for some reason? And if so, can you share maybe what one of those notable ones was and why you had to leave it on the cutting room floor?
Sure. Yeah, that does happen. Sometimes you write something and you think it's really good, and then you come back to it like 3 months later and you realize it's not good and it needs to be cut, even though you thought it was amazing at the time. So getting that distance from it is helpful. Other times somebody asks you not to publish it. Like you'll do it. I've done interviews with Dragon Ball voice actors, and they tell me something really juicy that I think fans would love to hear about. And then they go, "Oh yeah, please don't tell anybody that." And it's like, "Oh really? Because that was great." And now I can't. Because if I did, then I'd be breaching their trust and they wouldn't talk to me again. Like a normal reporter who, let's say, works for the Washington Post, New York Times, or some other, outlet, if they got a scoop, they would put it out on the internet, and it would be published in the news, and then they would get famous, and people were like, "Wow, you got the scoop." But I can't do that. So I have to wait until I get the okay, and then this book that I've been working on for 10 years finally gets published, and then people get to read it.
You mentioned it before, that the reviews have been generally positive, and I've noticed that. I've been, as I read these books, I log them on Goodreads, and I throw a star rating on them and a review. I think I've reviewed at least one of them on Amazon. I need to go back and probably review the others. When you get something that's maybe a little more critical or negative, even, how do you handle that kind of a review or that kind of comment?
I tend to break down in tears, and I grab a pillow and I just squeeze it really tight. No, I look at them and I question why they judged it the way that they did. And if they provided critical feedback, then I'm grateful for it. But sometimes you'll have like a 5-star rating and it's like 4 paragraphs long and it's detailed and thorough and eloquent. and then you have a 1-star rating right next to it, and it just says in all lowercase letters, "It sucked." And you're like, what am I supposed to do with that? Why did you write that 1-star rating? It doesn't help me at all. And all you did was lower the average for the overall rating. Now fewer people are going to buy it. So it's a little frustrating because you're not allowed as an author to contact the people who wrote the reviews or write little comments and things. They removed that ability a few years ago. And now we have no recourse. And if we report the rating, they say, no, it's in compliance. This is their opinion. The only way it would be out of compliance is if they used a bunch of swear words or they put some kind of nasty picture up there or something that wasn't relevant to the book. So there's really nothing you can do. And you just have to sort of take it with a grain of salt and carry on with your day. And it's kind of ignore it, but it sticks in your mind. The way our brains work is we tend to remember the negative things more than the positive. So it takes like 5 positive things to balance out one of the negative things. And so every once in a while, it'll just pop into your head. And then you have to sort of reinforce the positive. So I have a folder that I've labeled motivation, where I put positive comments that I've received from fans all over the world. And it's really nice to just go there every once in a while and open it up and read the nice things people have said. Like, I love your work. It inspired me to work out harder, or it gave me insights into my childhood, and it helped me better understand why I love Dragon Ball so much and why my friends love it and why we still love it to this day as young adults, like in our 30s, why we're still watching it every day and talking about it on podcasts and drawing fan manga and original characters and things. Like, these books help me understand myself. And when I read those, I forget about all of the negativity and careless comments that sometimes people make.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's shift topics again here a little bit. Let's actually talk about some of the books now. So the two of us are relatively familiar with Dragon Ball culture, as well as some of our listeners up to this point. We use it for a bunch of our research, and we've mentioned you a couple times already in just our few short months here. We're going to be plumbing all 6 volumes for sharing with our listeners in the future as well, but do you have any plans or hopes to continue that series? I know your website lists at least a part 7 as being a potential future installment, but is there still a plan for that, and perhaps maybe even further installments?
Yes, there are plans for that. I am still working on volume 7. There was actually an early edition that came out that should never have been published, but it did, and like 8 people got it. And it's like 800 pages of rough drafts that were published in volume 7. So that was a mistake with my distributor, who didn't cancel the book. But those 8 people have got it, and I'm still working on refining the rest of it. But the cool thing about this volume 7, it's all about the anime. So volumes 2 through 6 are about the manga, and then I go into the anime story and the origin of that and all of the culture that's in the filler episodes. But it begins with exclusive interviews with the composers of the Dragon Ball intro and outro themes. And I taught myself Japanese, and then I interviewed them in Japanese, and also spoke with the lyricists and the vocalists to gain their insights into these incredible themes that we've listened to hundreds of times. And I think that'll be a really valuable add to the experience of reading volume 7. And that's why it's taken so long. And there's just so many episodes.
Is that Shinsuke Kikuchi that you
no, or? I wasn't able to interview him before he passed away.
Yeah.
He does all the music for the inside of the episodes,
right?
But a different composer did the beginning and the ending themes. I asked to interview him, Shinsuke Kikuchi, but nobody that I spoke with knew how to reach him. And then he passed away, and I was really kicking myself because that was my, I tried, but I couldn't get access to him, and now he's gone.
Yeah, he hits my my personal background because he was composer for a lot of the old school Gamera movies also.
That's
and
right.
I'm super familiar with those. So
yeah, he's so talented, and he was the perfect choice for Dragon Ball because of all of the Japanese superheroes and the monsters and everything else that's in it. He was just such a perfect choice, and I feel like people who don't mesh, I guess, with the Japanese soundtrack, it could possibly be because they're also not familiar with the work that inspired it. There was just so much that went into the Dragon Ball anime because it was made for a Japanese audience, by Japanese people who grew up like Toriyama with these classic, Godzilla type films and Kamen Rider and just like Ultraman and all these other great series that he was like, oh yeah, he's the absolute best pick you could have ever had for a composer. But to get back into the rest of your question, I also will be doing Dragon Ball Z culture and Dragon Ball GT culture and probably Dragon Ball Super culture. But there's just like there's so many other books I'd like to do. A Dragon Ball sound book, all about the sound effects in the series. You could do a Dragon Ball Babes book with hot babes doing cosplay.
that would sell.
I know it's not as intellectually satisfying, I could say, but I know there's an audience for it. That's why it's on my list.
Okay. One more question for Dragon Ball culture. Well, I'm kind of cheating a little bit. It's a multi-part question. So which one of those books was your favorite to write? Which one, if any, did you feel like just sort of flowed out of you easily? And maybe which one gave you the hardest time in terms of laying out and pulling together? Again, if any of them apply.
The one that was the hardest was Volume 3, Battle, where I had to reveal the complete origin of the Tenkaichi Budokai in real world history. That one took a lifetime of work, like decades of martial arts experience and historical research to just delve into the history of martial arts tournaments that were on Rei's fighting platforms, and the fact that it goes into ancient Chinese history, and then the fact that Toriyama combined that with Balinese Hinduism and based the whole Tenkaichi Budokai, temple off of a Balinese temple, based off of his visit to Bali prior to the writing of those chapters. It was just so involved, and on top of that, I had to explain the history of martial arts and self-cultivation and the idea of improving yourself in a spiritual manner through this physical art form that really becomes a meditation in motion, and the self-development of the chi that the Japanese then called ki, and all of these interwoven elements that Toriyama just illustrated so seamlessly that you would never have even guessed were in there unless you already knew the symbolism or had, like, when you start out, you don't know any of this stuff. Then you see one piece and then you start to unravel it a little bit, and then you start to see a second piece and a third piece, and that's when you start to see a pattern. I had to be very careful in explaining the symbols that were there and connecting them to real world culture with actual citations so that people wouldn't think I was just making stuff up, and then tie that back to the source material and to Toriyama and the reasons he put it in there in the first place. I made a conscious effort to try and make it as easy to understand as possible, just like Toriyama did with his manga, because that was a piece of advice that his editor, Kazuhiko Torishima, gave him. He said, make it easy to understand because you're writing for 12-year-olds and they are not going to understand complex subject matters or situations. And so I took that to heart and I tried to apply that to everything that I write. So that was a long answer for the hardest part, but it really was a struggle. And I guess the inverse was what the part I enjoyed the most, and it was probably writing about Toriyama in Volume 1 because I relate to him in a lot of ways. I remember I was listening to your previous episode where you said that you related to him in not wanting to be around people or being a procrastinator
Oh yeah.
and doing things at the last minute because you have a deadline. And I can relate to that as well. And that's how I was growing up. And I also like making models. I put Warhammer models together and I paint them and I play with them with my friends. I've been doing that since I was a kid, and they recently got me back into it, and it's a lot of fun. So I can understand Toriyama's mindset, and doing the research, I got more into what he was into. And what I realized over time was that Toriyama has created his perfect world in Dragon Ball. The Dragon world is Toriyama's world. It's everything that he enjoys in life. It's filled with kung fu and sci-fi and superheroes and dinosaurs and big giant monsters and silly jokes and perverted humor. And it's bright and colorful and fun. And it's lighthearted. It's a place where Toriyama can escape to.
Yeah, Toriyama is definitely one of those not uncommon among creatives who is outwardly very different than his creation. You know, he created this world where it's very inclusive and bright and colorful, and it's generally, a lot of the characters are very outgoing in the show, and he's just not that guy, you know, in his real life. And I mean, that's just, Miyazaki is like the most miserable person on earth, and then his creations are such beautiful, gorgeous, you know, peaceful landscapes a lot of times. And then you have like Akio Jisoji, who is this like bright, fun, bubbly kind of guy who creates these like nightmarish things, you know. So that's
it's that contrast of opposites I find so fascinating.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So we are wrapping up a little bit here because you know, we like to just make sure we're not taking up too much of our listeners' time. Real quickly, I've got like 2 or 3 more questions.
Sure.
Let's just talk very quickly about the state of the Dragon Ball franchise right now. Do you keep up with the manga? Do you keep up with Super Dragon Ball Heroes, the games at all that are coming out? And what do you think about the forthcoming Dragon Ball Super Hero?
I'm excited about the film. I've of course seen all the movies. I'm really glad that Toriyama is still writing them. And I think it looks awesome. I see people being naysayers about the animation style, but I think Dragon Ball leads the way in every release. It's always doing groundbreaking things, whether it's the use of 3D technology or CG effects. Even back in the 90s, they were doing things other people weren't. And this form of 3D animation, we already know, you know, Western animation companies have you know, exceeded our expectations with that, and now we're seeing anime companies doing it, and they're making it look like a manga in motion. So I think it's gonna be really cool. And Toriyama wrote the script, so it's gonna be funny, and it's gonna be entertaining, and we're gonna see new transformations, and we're gonna see the next evolution of the series. And I think it's a great time to be a Dragon Ball fan. We're in the second renaissance of Dragon Ball right now. We had to go through decades of nothing, and thanks in large part to Dragon Ball Evolution, Toriyama is now involved with the series again. So I think we should be thankful for Evolution for being so bad that Toriyama got involved, and now we get to talk about it and brand new content coming out every month. I think it's really amazing.
I'm a lifelong kaiju fan, which I don't at all talk about on every single episode we have. But I mean, the same thing happened with Godzilla, actually. The 1998 movie with Matthew Broderick came out. It was so bad. Toho brought Godzilla out of retirement early, and a bunch of movies that had never been released in the US got released in the wake of that because there was an audience that was hungry for content, you know, for Godzilla content and not this sort of bastardization of it. So A
Right.
bad thing can beget a good thing very often.
Yeah, that's very true.
Right. So, make a quick list here. Godzilla, Mario, Pokemon, Hello Kitty, Dragon Ball. I think, I might be wrong, that most people could or would agree that these 5 franchises stand as the biggest pop cultural exports from Japan, especially in the United States. And there's obviously others in each of those sorts of milieu along the way, like Ultraman or Power Rangers or Zelda or Metroid, Doraemon or Kuromi, One Piece, Naruto, Demon Slayer. I mean, people can argue about what's the best, and, these things have all kind of traded off in terms of which one's the most popular at any given moment, but those 5, Godzilla, Mario, Pokemon, Hello Kitty, and Dragon Ball, maintain a sort of stature among Americans specifically. I mean, my 90-year-old grandmother knows what Dragon Ball Z is. And granted, she calls it Dragon Balls, and she says, "Oh, is that Dragon Balls thing that you like?" But she's heard of it, right?
Sure.
So, what do you think it is about Dragon Ball that makes it stand shoulder to shoulder with these giants, some of them literally, of the industry?
Also, a quick note, I would add Gundam to that list.
Okay.
Good call.
Yeah, because Gundam is massive. But why is Dragon Ball so successful? Well, I think I made a pretty strong case for it in my books. I really think it's the culture. I think it appeals to everyone across the world. Because there are other series that have big, strong men punching each other and screaming at the top of their lungs, but they're not as popular as Dragon Ball. So it's not just the action, right? And there's other funny series that it'll make you laugh when you watch it, or they've got all kinds of perverted fan service in them, right? But they're not as popular as Dragon Ball. So why exactly this one series becomes so successful? And you really have to look at it from a perspective of worldviews. And I think when you do that, you'll realize that it has everything that everybody likes all at once. And it's done so seamlessly that you don't have to think about it. It's presented in a manner that's easy to understand and accept, and it's funny and entertaining, but it's also heartfelt. It takes you on this lifelong journey of these characters that start out as children and grow up through so much hardship to the point where they can eventually have their own families and children, and then their children go through hardships. And you're going through that journey as you watch the series in your own life. You're experiencing, like, there's so many people I've spoken to throughout the world who felt a connection to Gohan because they were getting picked on for being nerds, and they wanted to fight back and become strong, and then they did somehow. And it's like, wow, okay, so this series is so much more than just entertainment. There's really something going on here, and if you go to Latin America, the voice actors are treated like A-list celebrities because everybody over there loves Vegeta and Goku, and especially in Brazil, it's just massive. And there's so much beyond just what we grew up with in America. There's this similar story repeating itself in every country where Dragon Ball airs or is published. It's really a series that speaks to people's hearts and the way that our minds work as human beings, as like products of culture and our environment and the patterns that we see in the world around us. And it gives us meaning and purpose, like this idea that we can grow and become stronger and literally transform our minds and bodies into becoming supermen or women and people who, like, I did you look at Frieza and he's like, is that a man or a woman? Is it transgender? There's somebody who, like, that appeals to everybody, regardless of how you self-identify. There's somebody in Dragon Ball that you can identify with. It's really transformative like that, and powerful. And Toriyama just put all of this in there because that's what he liked. This is the most amazing thing, is he wasn't even trying to change people's lives. He just wanted to entertain Japanese boys and do that once a week because that's what he liked to do. And Even his editor, Torishima-san, says Dragon Ball is meaningless. There's no greater meaning to it. There's nothing. It's just pure entertainment. And it's like, are you kidding me? Did you listen to everything I just told you? You know, like, but that's how he feels about it. Because for him, it was just a product. You know, they weren't intending to transform people's lives every day and around the world, but they did, and they continue to do so, and that's why it's so successful.
Right. That is a whole can of worms. The inherent value or lack of value, whatever that. God, I'd love to talk to you for hours about, honestly, like, because I don't think it's like a super open and shut. Yes, it does have a lot of value, or no, it doesn't. Right. I think the answer is somewhere like it's kind of both. You know. Just because it is for kids, right? So when people do get sometimes like a little too, I don't know what the word is, but like people get a little too hung up on the structure of it, you know, and that was a lazy bit of writing or stuff like that, and you're like, this is for children, like it's meant for a child to be able to understand. So you have to just be willing to admit to yourself that you like something that's for kids. And I mean, I'm okay with that. It's just a lot of people kind of aren't. And that's, I mean, God, I'd love, one day we'll get you back on here and we will have like a whole episode about that.
Okay. That'd be great.
But like I said, we're wrapping up. So are there any plugs that you'd like to give? I know you're working on a whole bunch of stuff. Is there anything you've got sort of impending, anything that you want to throw out for our listeners to be able to find you, buy your books, look out for some new project you got coming down the pipe?
Yeah, you can find me at Derek Padula on social media. It's DerekPadula. And of course, my website, thedowdragonball.com. I just published the second volume of Dragon Ball Culture in Spanish. All my books are available in ebook, paperback, and hardback, and I'm going to be doing some audiobooks soon. And like I said, I've got French and Portuguese coming out, and I just keep plugging away. I'm hiring some journalists. I'm going to be adding news articles to my site. So we're going to be getting probably 3 to 5 articles a week about the latest Dragon Ball news, so you can come to that and keep up to date on the really important stuff. And it's not going to be made up stuff like you see on some websites I won't mention, where they just spit out garbage every day. This will be actual, real Dragon Ball news that you are interested in and will care about. And I'm just trying to grow my platform and get, you know, more Dragon Ball fans excited about the series and help them better understand the series and also themselves. Because I really think Dragon Ball is a tool for introspection and growth. And it can be simple entertainment, but it can also be a way for you to look within and develop yourself and persevere through hardships and become a better person for your sake and for the sake of everyone around you. And I think that's a really special gift that Toriyama has given us. And I feel that it's, like I said, it saved my life, and I wouldn't be around right now talking to you if it weren't for Dragon Ball. So that's my way of giving back.
Excellent. Well, Derek, we really appreciate you taking some time out to talk to us. And
yes, thank you very much.
Like I said, I have so many more questions I would still like to ask you, but we do try to be considerate of our listeners' time. We usually are wrapping up in under an hour, actually, but you know, I let this go because I thought it was a really good discussion.
Well, thank you
hopefully you're up for coming back someday and,
sure,
and talking to us again. You know, maybe when, I don't know, Volume 7 is finished or something. But even if not, you know, even if not, I would like to have you back on someday, and we could talk about all the things that we didn't get to touch on here.
Sure. Yeah, it's an endless discussion. Dragon Ball is endless and wonderful.
Right. So we'll let Derek go, and we'll take our leave of you here as well, listeners. Thanks for joining us on this special episode of the podcast. Will we continue drifting aimlessly through space? Will we read some of Derek's books to help us pass the time? Rhetorical question, that's a yes. Find out next time, except I already said yes, and help us achieve our final forum.
Final Form is written and produced by Tom Gwelly. It is performed by Dan Kinney and Tom Gwelly. Our webmaster is Dan Kinney. Our theme music is provided by YouTube content creator GVG Kid. Want to learn more about the Dragon Ball universe, including concept art, behind-the-scenes interviews, and recommendations from Jelli and Bekinney? Connect with us on social media. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Final Forum Pod. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you receive your podcasts. And of course, make sure to share it with your friends and family and help us spread the word of the glory of Lord Frieza. The Frieza Force thanks you for your listenership.